7/18/2019 will go down as the worst day for otaku in history. While the massive loss of human life alone makes it such, it might not be apparent to some people just how much was lost in this incident. Being KyoAni's main studio, a huge portion of the archives of their work is said to be simply gone and unrecoverable. Furthermore, people suspect that certain studio-exclusive digital tools might be unrecoverable as well. But even worse than the loss of tools or archives was what was lost from the staff along with their lives. Animators, let alone high-caliber animators, are so rare and valuable that losing even one is a cost that is literally immeasurable. These people could change the world with just pencil and paper, and that's exactly what they were doing. Kyoto Animation is essentially destroyed. There's really no other way around it. Otaku media has lost one of its most powerful vanguards. At least in the Anglosphere, the incident was reported as a crazed individual that wormed his way into the KyoAni studio, set fire, and that was that. It hasn't occurred to most people that there are actually quite a large number of seriously suspicious points to be investigated about this incident. Details that are strange or just too perfect to be coincidental. Now, without actually going to Japan and getting control of an investigative unit, certain things cannot be proven. But there are many things we know for a fact, and I'm going to explore them. For all of us who looked into this, the first things on our minds were who did this and why did they do it? Now, for the second question of why, my mind immediately came to the most likely reason. However, it's too early to talk about that. The first answer to these questions came in the form of the infamous Barisaki-kun. Barisaki-kun posted these long, crazy posts on 5chan about taking obsessive pictures of railroads. He became euphonium ruining his life and wanting to take revenge on KyoAni. Barisaki-kun didn't post anymore after the incident, so many people assumed that maybe he was the culprit. Some people, eager for a scoop, even went ahead and reported that he was. Well, they were foolish, as one look at Barisaki-kun's subtle, humor-laden, and pun-filled post would tell you that he's just an intelligent shit poster, not a crazed arson. The post stopped after the incident simply because he had the decency to stop. At least people are 90% sure this is the case. Now, eventually Aoba Shinji's name was released, but it took quite a while, which is important to keep in mind as it's one of the strange details of this incident. Because it took so long for Aoba Shinji's name to be released, we actually got a lot of information on him beforehand. The most important point was that he yelled some Japanese that basically announced to, you ripped it off, as in you copied something that you weren't allowed to copy. A little later, we were told that he specifically said that they ripped his novel off. People's minds ran wild with this. It didn't take long for some anti-otaku narratives to start here and there. But a little deeper look into Aoba Shinji would reveal that those words he yelled are no basis for assuming he was an inflamed otaku. In fact, the more information we got about him, the more we would realize there's probably no reason to think about the words he yelled at all. They probably didn't mean anything. Aoba Shinji is completely insane. To summarize the most important facts we know about Aoba, we know that his parents divorced while he was somewhat young. He lived with his father, who later died. He changed occupations and apartments somewhat frequently. In 2006, he got in some trouble with the police for stealing underwear. His mother seemed to help him with the rent a little bit after that incident. He has an older brother and a younger sister, but he didn't seem to have any contact with them for a long time at the time of the incident. In 2012, he committed a robbery of a store armed with a knife, in which he took just a few $100s worth of yen and then got caught not too much later. When he was caught, he said something quite incoherent, referencing Takahashi Katsuya from the Olmu incident of the 90s. This is the first hint that the words of Aoba are probably not to be looked into deeply. After Aoba served his sentence, he was put into mental rehabilitation. From then to this day, he has supposedly been living off of welfare. He's 41 now and probably hasn't had contact with even his mother since the robbery. Now, there's a few important notes about Aoba's behavior. A few days before the incident, on the 14th, he had been blasting loud music, possibly from anime or video games from his apartment. This is more information that was released very irresponsibly, helping paint Alba as an otaku. The truth was, the kind of music Alba was blasting was just not relevant because he was simply doing whatever he could to make noise. He hit the walls and even made alarm clocks go off. When confronted by a neighbor, he grabbed the neighbor by the collar and screamed incoherent lines at him. Stuff like, "Shut up, I don't have any room left to breathe. I have nothing left to lose." Additionally, after he got caught for the store robbery incident back in 2012, his room was found with smashed glass, smashed walls, and a smashed computer. He was obviously suffering from insanity for quite some time. Now, that level of insanity is certainly a good enough reason to attack an animation studio or anything for that matter. But the question is if it's a good enough means to do so. And this is where things start getting a little strange. In the interest of not seeing the KyoAni fire ever be repeated again, it's important to look into the details of this case and think about each possible contributing factor. Even if it's just in the slightest way, I know that the more we think about what went into this incident, the more we can possibly prevent another incident like this from happening again. The first strange thing about this incident is the place he chose to attack. What Alba shouted was that they ripped off his novel, and some say that he also shouted that he needed to speak to the company president. Alba lived in Saitama on the eastern side of Japan, the Kanto region. If he wanted to attack KyoAni, why not attack the studio in the Kanto region? Furthermore, if he is willing to travel to the Kansai region, why go after the KyoAni studio? Why not go after the business headquarters? After all, if he has some delusion about them stealing his novel and he needs to speak to the president, that's where it would have made more sense for him to go. And yet he went specifically to the main KyoAni studio. Now, there's good enough reason to assume his choosing of the main studio was just entirely random. But if we start taking a few more details into account, it's possible that it's not as random as it may initially appear. Not a lot of people realize this, but this wasn't just any ordinary day at KyoAni's main studio. This happened to be a day where a lot of the core staff, KyoAni's key players, were gathered. They were gathered for a reason. NHK was scheduled to film a special program on the studio that day. As far as I've seen, this information was not released publicly. There may have been quiet rumors, but I didn't see anything that floated its way onto the internet. Someone like Alba, who seemed to have essentially no human connection left in his life, would essentially have no chance of knowing that this was a special day at KyoAni. The next important detail is the sheer effectiveness of Alba's arson. Alba was able to trap the employees through clever use of the studio's spiral staircase, an oversight in fire safety when the building was built. Could someone who could barely pull off a store robbery be able to carry out such an effective and elaborate plan all on their own? Again, the possibility of the coincidence is always there, but if it's just a coincidence, the coincidences do not end there. The important thing to realize is that one does not simply waltz on into an animation studio with 40 liters of gasoline and a bag full of knives, let the gasoline loose, and then set fire. If you have ever seen the inside of an animation studio, you would know that they are extremely secure, even for Western security standards, despite Japan being nearly the safest country on Earth. It is not only human lives that need to be protected in an animation studio, but also technology, media assets, and company secrets. President Hatta even said that they had received a threatening mail in the past. It's not clear if this mail had anything to do with Alba. And they consulted the police and had security cameras installed for the studio. He never expected anything like this incident to be possible. And this is where the coincidences start racking up. Usually, when expecting visitors, an animation studio will either hand them a card key or wait for them to arrive, which upon they will escort the visitors. The KyoAni studio had its front gate completely left open on 7/18, however. We can only assume that this was either a serious and unusual oversight from the studio management or that it was a special request from NHK for the shutter to be opened. All of the reports from NHK are written with the implication that NHK was not yet at KyoAni studio when the fire broke out. However, President Hatta specifically stated that there were visitors that day, and that is why the front gate was open. The wording is ambiguous, so it's not clear if he's implying that he was merely planning for visitors to come or visitors were already coming. There are some suggestions that NHK staff was indeed there at the time of the fire, or that they told the studio to raise the gates early. These could simply be a mistake on NHK's part, accidentally making the studio vulnerable, but when factoring the actions of Aoba, the pieces fit together a little more nicely than what would be comfortable. About 500 meters or so from the studio is the small Momoyama Shuhaku Park. Aoba Shinji was witnessed by several people sleeping on a bench in that park the evening before and the morning of the incident. A middle school boy, a middle school girl, and an adult lady. All three of them remember his distinct red shirt and recall how suspicious they thought he looked. What was particularly notable was that there was a black bag and some other bags, and along with a large flat wheel cart. Now, the Japanese do have an expectation of safety. Many of them may even take it for granted. And so they may not have taken their suspicions too seriously. But Aoba was a very disheveled man. He was quite overweight, especially for Japanese standards, and it was said that his clothing seemed to be unchanged from the day he grabbed his neighbor by the collar, which was the 14th. Japan may come with an expectation of safety, but on the other hand, it also comes with strong expectations of certain norms. A man like Aoba stuck out like a sore thumb. He's even noted for his unusually large stature for a Japanese man. It certainly feels strange that not a single patrol officer thought it wise to question him when at least 3 people saw him in the park alone and thought he looked suspicious. He was known to be lying there in Momoyama Shuhaku Park since at least the time when the middle school girl was coming home from school. But perhaps the strangest detail about the park is that an older man who regularly uses the park stated that he saw a strange black bag placed beside the bench days ago, but did not see Aoba Shinji. Unfortunately, the interviewer didn't think it was important to get the man to tell the specific date at which he saw the bag, but from the man's wording, it is likely that he saw the bag even before the 17th. Other articles published more recently believe he was indeed in Kyoto since about a day or so before the 17th. So what was Aoba doing in Kyoto for so long? It stated that he was seen on the 17th around the KyoAni business headquarters, which is about a kilometer away. He was pushing a wheel cart around. Aoba was caught on KyoAni headquarters security camera as well as witnessed by nearby residents. Having listened to every broadcast of theirs since the incident, I know that NHK Radio has been somewhat tight-lipped about it, especially when taking into account just how much of a big deal this incident is for Japan. There has been tons of information worth reporting on with this incident that NHK Radio just hasn't bothered with. Yet they were quite quick to report the fact that Aoba was seen near the headquarters and suggest that Aoba was cooking up some plan in the process. Aoba bought his lighter, 2 portable gasoline holders, and his flat wheel cart at the Uji City Home Center. This store was 5 kilometers away from the KyoAni main studio, and the KyoAni headquarters sits between the two. It's quite likely that he passed by the KyoAni headquarters simply for that reason. But if we are to humor for a moment that Aoba was considering attacking the KyoAni headquarters, a couple of questions come to mind. First off, why situate himself in Momoyama Shuhaku Park? It's far more conspicuous for him to be sleeping there all night and morning than if he was just to hole up in the Uji City 24/7 McDonald's bathroom or something. The materials for the crime he could have just waited to purchase upon being ready to commit the actual crime. Next, being inconspicuous didn't seem to be a priority of Aoba's at all. He had no problem with leaving his black bag at the park, which may or may not have been full of knives at the time. He had no problem with wheeling a wheel cart with two 20-liter gasoline holders and a lighter in his pocket for 5 whole kilometers while going out of his way to pass in front of the KyoAni headquarters on the way. He had no problem wearing a red shirt that stood out strongly in everyone's minds. And again, he had no problem sleeping for that long in the park. If one didn't know better, one might think he was trying to draw attention to himself. Are the Japanese police simply that incompetent? And the last point to address is that on the day of the crime, Aoba made no hint that the headquarters was on his mind. He simply went straight for the main studio. Was it his plan to wheel all that gasoline back down to Uji City and attack the headquarters? But he happened to notice that the main studio was unlocked and thought, why not attack this one instead? For someone who managed to stage his attack on the perfect day and carried it out with the perfect execution for maximizing death and destruction, it's a little hard to believe he just got lucky. And it still leaves us to question why he chose to be in Kyoto for so long. Why not show up the morning of or the night before? Why spend so much time there, especially considering every minute was another minute he risked getting questioned by police, having his personal history looked up, and getting sent back to the correctional facility? We know that Aoba spent time in an internet cafe before he bought the wheel cart. The news reported this detail like he was gathering information, just like when they said he scouted the KyoAni headquarters. But this doesn't really make any sense. There's nothing to scout other than the layout of the streets. I mean, certainly it is possible that Aoba used the internet cafe to utilize Google Maps to get comfortable with the area. But that still doesn't explain why Aoba went straight to Momoyama Shuhaku Park, which is right by the studio, not the headquarters, the night before the incident after getting all his supplies ready. We know that he must have stayed somewhere else the night he spent in Kyoto other than the 17th, because he was not seen sleeping in the park any night other than the 17th. It's not like Aoba went to Kyoto, got everything he needed to attack, and then used trial and error each day until the studio was open. He specifically prepared to attack on the 18th, and he specifically chose the vicinity of the studio, not the headquarters, to stand by the night before. It's just not possible for Aoba to have known that that was the day that KyoAni Studio would be vulnerable. The information was not released, and NHK staff supposedly had not even arrived in Kyoto yet. When we think about the fact that Aoba was able to push this wheel cart carrying 40 liters of gasoline into the studio without anyone stopping him, the question of why the KyoAni Studio gate was unlocked returns. Without wearing NHK staff attire, it'd be reasonable to expect that someone would call out to him before he reached the area a bit past the spiral staircase where he let all the gasoline loose and then set fire. The fact that Aoba went unnoticed certainly increases the possibility that NHK staff was already at the studio, or that they prematurely contacted the studio and stated that they have arrived. Neither action necessarily makes NHK to blame directly for this incident, but it certainly would make them indirectly responsible to some extent. Due to just how many questions and doubt there are surrounding NHK's involvement in this incident, one would expect that they would have a lot to say about it in order to clear up the confusion. NHK, however, did entirely the opposite. The most straightforward and obviously egregious action on the part of NHK was the story they ran on television. The day of the fire, the information had come out. We all knew that NHK had planned on visiting KyoAni Studio to run a special on them. The crime would have never succeeded if this was not the case, as the front gate would have remained locked. But NHK was reluctant to report this. They shamelessly misquoted President Hatta by twisting his words to imply that the front gate was open simply because it was morning time and employees were coming in and going out. While this alone feels like a simple, cowardly act to avoid getting fingers pointed at them, when we look at some of the other details about NHK, the possibility that they might actually have something to hide becomes a little more likely. In preparation to meet with the studio, NHK staff happened to be very close to the scene of the crime when it occurred. Strangely, the only video that they published was a very short clip of someone filming from inside of a car. Typically in a situation like this, footage is valuable for scoops, And with NHK happening to get the jump on the rest of the news stations, they were free to get all the exclusive footage they wanted. But that's not what they did. Things get even stranger when we look at a certain article they published where they describe the NHK staff reaching the scene of the crime. The article simply states that the NHK news team was near the scene and ran over to find the suspect lying on his back, surrounded by 3 police. However, upon searching for an archived version of the article using webarchive.org, we can see that the article originally stated quite a few more details. Originally, it was written that NHK director Yoshida Tatsuhiro was on his way to the KyoAni headquarters to meet up before heading over to the main studio for 11 a.m. It also clearly states that Yoshida is an employee of the NHK Tokyo Broadcasting Center. They erased this information completely from their article. It's not entirely clear why they changed the article like that. The simplest answer would be that they didn't want to bring attention to NHK's plans to meet with the KyoAni studio. Additionally, Yoshida might have personally requested to have his name pulled to avoid personal controversy. If that was his goal, however, it backfired, as lots of rumors have been surfacing about Yoshida. Some found a Facebook account that may be his, which says he grew up in Saitama, near Aoba, making some conclude that they may have known each other. Others say that Yoshida did a special report on mentally ill criminals being rehabilitated, and Aoba was one of the people he came into contact with. These rumors have yet to be proven. However, I did manage to find that the rumors are not quite as unfounded as it might initially appear. I found a special that NHK ran in their blog from 2017 in which they visited the very correctional facility where Aoba had not long before been a patient. We don't know if there are any implications to this or not, or if Yoshida was specifically involved or not, but the fact still remains a fact. NHK changed that article for a reason. The information they removed is not information they want us thinking about. There are several other odds and ends that seem in some way a little off, although there isn't enough information to rule one way or another about them. First is the strange detail of Aoba's stomach tattoo that was only talked about on the day of the attack, but never again since. People wonder if that tattoo indicated any connection to the Yakuza. Next is the amount of money Aoba spent. At least 6 kitchen knives, a metal hammer, gasoline holders, a wheel cart, 40 liters of gasoline, flammable compound, and a train ticket. While most of these things on their own aren't too expensive, it is interesting how someone on welfare, who once was desperate enough to rob a store specifically for money to use for personal enjoyment, was able to come up with enough money to pull this off. It's far from impossible, especially if he wasn't planning on surviving this incident and thus was willing to spend whatever was necessary. But there are some suggestions that Aoba did not plan on dying. In fact, there are a few strange nuances that suggest a dissonance between Aoba's plans and the actions he performed. Aoba came equipped with weapons, not just fire. He carried out what would normally be thought to be a highly strategic plan, choosing not to simply dump the gasoline the moment he entered the studio, but instead to utilize the spiral staircase. And yet he didn't understand that he himself would be engulfed in the flames, as he clearly brought the knives and hammer to use as murder weapons. Aoba ran out of the building like a madman after the fire started. He did not try to take his own life with a knife. In fact, he even desperately rang the doorbell of a lady's home looking for help. It's certainly possible that Aoba planned on dying and the pain of burning changed his mind. But given how insane Aoba already is, it's not hard to imagine him carrying through a suicide in such a situation. The strategic use of fire for murder, and yet the ignorance of the way it would engulf himself, is strange. But it does not alone prove that Aoba had help. In fact, using the fire so effectively might have just been a complete accident. But there is another detail. The roof was locked. None of the employees expected the roof to be locked, and no reporter could find a reason for it being locked. It almost feels like someone intentionally wanted to use the spiral staircase to shoot the flames upward and trap the employees against the locked door of the roof. No one would be in a better position to plan this than someone on the NHK staff, naturally, as they would have been informed of the layout of the building in order to prepare for their special. But of course, there is no conclusive evidence. Aoba Shinji lost consciousness after being detained by the police. He was moved from the hospital in Kyoto to a hospital in Osaka the other day. He still has not regained consciousness. It's starting to become clear that Aoba is quite possibly in a vegetable state. There are so many questions that likely don't even have a chance to be answered unless he were to wake up. Unfortunately, it is becoming clear that the secrets die with Aoba Shinji. Now, I was prepared for the otaku scapegoating as soon as this was announced. In Japan, it actually has implicitly started to an extent. Otaku scapegoating specifically is going to be more of a Japanese thing, while in the West, they're going to be hashing out feminism versus anti-feminism, along with other ideological projections. People will and have been using anime, and sometimes especially the works of KyoAni, as a platform to project their political ideas. The act of disrespecting otaku works through self-projection alone is just absolutely disgusting, but to continue to do so after this tragedy is nothing less than unforgivable. The people trying to appropriate this incident for their own agenda are every bit as bad as the people spouting degeneracy such as like, I'm glad KyoAni burned, or no one cares about all the other death in the world. The reason KyoAni had a 2-to-7 male-to-female ratio is that that's what they were essentially like from the start, and that's what they were comfortable with. Their works are otaku. Not left-wing, not right-wing, not centrist, otaku. Anyone who employs enough ignorance to project their modern Western systems of thought onto the studio doesn't understand the first thing about Kyoto animation. Such cultural imperialism should not be tolerated. Starting with the 10s, there was a business model shift with KyoAni. In 2009, they came up with the idea that they should be a light novel publisher and even adapt some of the works they published themselves. I suspect that KyoAni was a little unique in terms of just how close the production business side of them was to the studio side of them. They were able to produce their own works, not all by themselves, but at least partially through their own funding, their anime was created. KyoAni was an ambitious studio. I have no doubt in my mind that their sights were set on appealing to as many people worldwide as possible. In that way, they could be compared to studios like Bones, IG, and Madhouse, all of which have been confirmed to be cozy with international investors for the sake of mainstream success. KyoAni has even been striking some Netflix deals recently. Thanks to informed speculation in addition to the confirmation of some creators, it has become known that studios that get involved with large investors, especially international, begin to receive some creative demands from the investors. The reason for this is, of course, cultural. Media giants do not simply control market space for money, they also do so for power. Works of art affect us in the same way that religion has affected mankind. It greatly influences what we value, what we desire, what we work toward, and what we choose to protect. The media we consume affects the way we live our lives, perhaps more than anything. This is why so many people can experience nothing short of salvation from otaku media. A studio/company with that kind of horsepower in its productions, putting out works very consistently that are gaining more and more of a consistently mainstream platform, is extremely dangerous. The big international media controllers do not want heavy-duty media being produced that they don't completely endorse, especially not media with the kind of power that KyoAni had. One could argue that KyoAni has been compromising on the level of its otaku values throughout the 10s in favor of appealing to the mainstream. However, I think that they've made it quite clear that there are lines that they will not cross, an amount of honest otaku value that they pledge to continue putting into all of their works, along with the fact that they will continue to be a company that can produce, publish, and promote itself. For international media controllers, this is essentially a threat level red situation. Otaku media means media that is not spreading their value systems. Otaku means people who are not subscribing to their value systems. As Okada Toshio once said, An otaku is someone who decides for himself what he likes, not someone who is told what to like. To this incestuous, endlessly powerful network of media controllers, the loss of KyoAni was nothing more than a boon. These people are every bit as vile as that sounds. They will criticize the industry in hopes of changing it to their design. They will criticize some fans and coax others to divide us. They will pour money into this industry until they own it. There will be straw men. People will say that the industry is sexist, knowing that we can no longer point to KyoAni as evidence that women have just as much access to this industry as anyone, and they don't need corporate or government intervention to get there. They won't care when we point out all the amazing female animators working at other studios. People will say how bad the work conditions in the anime industry are, and how KyoAni did everything right that every other studio does wrong. They will ignore the fact that the work conditions are bad in the animation studios because of bullying from production companies, something KyoAni was able to avoid through the very business model of self-sufficiency that they want to crush. They will use this opportunity to call for intervention in anime studios of any kind, under pretenses of making them safer, making the work environment better, or bringing more women in even. They are going to try and stir up support for intervention. They want to control the otaku. But that's all just the cherry on top. Whether it was merely the actions of an independent, insane person or something bigger, the important part is that a studio just got destroyed. And it wasn't just any studio. It was a studio putting out the most powerful competition for the international media masters. I can only imagine how many people KyoAni's works have converted from consumers of degenerate mainstream media into proud otaku. Stand by the otaku eternally. Do not stand for anything that pits us against ourselves. Every opportunity we have to make the otaku stronger, even in the slightest way, make the most of. We need it now more than ever.